Oh, hi there, guys. So this week marks 1 year since Labour were elected to government. I'm going to talk today about how I think it's gone, and I'm going to give my assessment of their performance and what that means for this country. Before I get into it, I'd be extremely grateful if you could subscribe to the channel for daily analysis of politics and the economy. And please do like the video if you enjoy what I talk about or find it interesting in any way. So 14 long years we had of Tory destruction. Austerity, Brexit, COVID, corruption, sex scandals, incompetence, you name it, finally over. And were we to hope just for some respite now that the self styled grown ups were back in charge? Now, I didn't vote Labour, but you know what? I actually did have a slight hope that they would grow into the job, they'd be a success, because ultimately, even the worst Labour government's always better than any Tory government, in my opinion. But what a disappointment this last 12 months has been overall. So I'm going to set out today why I think they've been a disappointment, and I'm going to talk more widely about their political project and what that means for this country. Now, when you get elected after such a long time in the wilderness, there's always going to be that sense of hope and just a natural feeling of optimism that comes when there's a big change in life. But bizarrely, they immediately doused all that goodwill and hope with just a shower of misery. Every single interview we had with a Labour minister at the start of this government, they were talking about this £22 billion black hole. They were telling anyone who would listen about how bad things were. They didn't do an emergency budget at the start of the government, which would have wiped the slate clean. So instead, what we had was 5 months of shrieking about how bad everything was before the budget. So everyone was fearing and expecting the worst. And that delay then also caused uncertainty for business and effectively put the economy on ice for 5 months. They decided to do, inexplicable policies outside of their budget, like cutting the winter fuel allowance, for which they had no mandate and which wasn't in their manifesto. It was just nonsensical as an idea. And at the same time as that sort of economic incompetence, we also had the news that they've got their snouts in the trough, because all those stories in the media at the time about the Lord Ali revelations and about him paying for, tickets to pop concerts, clothes and glasses. So they were giving off this vibe of continuity Tory, and they were feeding into that narrative that they're all the same. And then we finally got round to the budget. And again, in my opinion, that was overly negative and dishonest. The flagship tax raising policy that they came up with in that budget was a sleight of hand, because they promised not to raise taxes on working people via NI or income tax. But instead, they raised employers' national insurance, which is essentially the same thing as a tax on workers, because it will get passed on to workers either via lower wages or via increased prices. So again, there was that slight stench of dishonesty to it, and that feeling that they're all the same. And for most of this year, it feels a lot like Starmer's just been abroad and focused on foreign policy. Every other week he seems to be at some sort of international summit or other, some sort of G7 conference. So I've had that sense that he's just been weirdly absent for much of this year. And then that brings us neatly to the last few weeks. We had the spending review initially, and that committed a whole load of money to big infrastructure projects, which is good on the face of it, but the results of which won't be seen for many years. While day-to-day spending was flat, mostly flat in the spending review. So the services that people interact with on a daily basis, such as their local council, they're still going to be starved of funds. And people's experience of living in this country is just going to remain mostly crap. And then we've had the absolute shambles of the last couple of weeks, where first we had the rowing back on the winter fuel payments, and now this week the humiliating climb down on PIP cuts. So we've had two humiliating U-turns within weeks of each other. That was a whistle-stop tour of all of the negative stuff that's happened this past year. But for balance, let's think about the good things they've done. So initially, they resolved the industrial disputes with the public sector and the NHS workers. Good. We've had the Employment Rights Bill going through Parliament. Good. We've had a housebuilding programme announced. Good. Pumping money into the NHS to get waiting lists down, breakfast clubs. They've launched 44 bills in Parliament. All good. So it suggests that they've got a lot of stuff going on in the background, and they're putting things in place for, to make things better for ordinary people. So that's all good. But I can't escape the fact that the overall mood music has just been entirely one of doom and gloom. And I doubt very much if an average person knows a great deal about any of those things that I've just mentioned, or if they do know about them, gives the government much credit for them. because the Tories left this country in such a state. So to improve services from extremely crap to only slightly crap isn't seen as a sort of a massive win, and it's what people vote Labour for anyway. So I don't think they actually get much credit for all of the stuff that I just mentioned. So what does all this tell us about the Labour Party and about politics more generally in this country? I think the first thing it tells me is that we're still beholden in this country to a political class who are just out of touch with ordinary people's lives and who operate and exist within parameters which are set out by people that we can't see and that we don't elect. So whether that's the Treasury, the bond markets, or some faint neoliberal dogma that just floats around magically in the air. And for that reason, despite doing lots of stuff and despite some of the positive stuff that I've just mentioned, Starmer, Reeves, McSweeney and all the other people at the top of the Labour Party, they haven't been able to paint a picture of what they want Britain to look like in 5 years' time. And I think that's because that wasn't really part of their brief. Their job, as they saw it, was to make sure that the left in this country were ejected from public life and were seen as unelectable. And they achieved that with absolutely massive success. However, once that job was done and they were safely en route to power via the Tories screwing up so badly, I've got no doubt that they thought that just turning up and being competent, wearing a nice suit, saying the right things, would be enough to keep people on side and win at least 2 terms. But I think what they overlooked in their analysis of this country is that this country's broken. Nothing works and everything is a rip-off for ordinary people. As a result, everyone is weary and cynical and everyone has just had enough, essentially. And to bring that down to the personal level, none of the Labour front bench are going to be particularly aware of that because they're all extremely rich people. To a large extent, they're insulated from the lives of ordinary people. And I know that there are some working class people on the Labour front bench, like Angela Rayner, but the Labour Party is not rooted in the community or in local politics anymore. A lot of the 2024 intake, they were parachuted in because they were loyal to Starmer. There's this top-down approach within Labour that prevents any sort of deviation from the plan. So John McDonnell wrote this week in an article for The Guardian that the local constituency parties are banned from talking about certain subjects in their meetings. Now that is not the hallmark of a confident and successful political project, in my opinion. So I'd also argue that the Labour Party as it exists in 2025 is effectively a moderate one nation Tory party in outlook. The basic premise seems to be keep things ticking over, don't do anything too radical, don't upset business or the wealthy, hit the poorest when you need to, be tough on immigration and defence, bear down hard on welfare. That is exactly what I imagine a Tory party led by Rory Stewart or Dominic Reid, for example, might be like. And I think for a Labour Party with a 156-seat majority, that is pretty dismal and quite depressing, really. So my overall assessment probably gives them about 3 out of 10 for their first year in charge. I do expect there to be a changing of the guard at the top of Labour, maybe after the local elections next year. So not all is lost, but I think if they do continue on this path, then they're absolutely guaranteed to be a one-term government because their base is not going to come out and vote for them on this prospectus, simple as that. Thanks a lot, guys. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you think they're getting on? Many thanks. See you next time.